everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Flipping the Barrel. Today, we are in the Digital Wildcatters studio. Everybody say hello.
Hey, everybody.
Massiel and Kevin Neveu, the CEO of Precision Drilling. He is a seasoned leader in the energy industry whose journey is dynamic as the field itself. Y'all are going to love this episode today with Kevin. From his early career in oil and gas to sustaining and being a key figure in innovation and sustainability, Kevin is phenomenal. Originally born and raised in Alberta, Canada, and I just cannot get enough about like when I met you, Kevin. Even though it was virtual first, I'm so glad that we're here in person. Your story was something that I just really one of those things where like you're growing up with your dad, you know, seeing him in the oil field to where you're at today was just really inspiring. And I'm really looking forward to our listeners to really get to know more about you, and more importantly, know your lifelong career in oil and gas started at such a young age, which I thought was really cool as well. So we're really excited, and thank you for being with us here today at the Digital Wildcatter studio in Houston.
Jamie, it's really fun to be here with you today, and I really haven't thought about it much until you began asking all those questions.
Yeah. Yes.
It's always cool when you can reflect back on your journey and think about all the things that you've been through, because it's not like you're thinking on it on the daily basis, but sharing your story kind of all comes back together. So thank you for being here. You grew up in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, so fellow Canadian. And like Jamie mentioned, your dad was in the oil and gas industry, and he was running a rig business, and he was also working as a contractor, like contracting as a welder. And so the first time you ever went to a rig, you were actually 5 years old, and you were just impressed by the machinery, the sound, and just the fact that you were powering the world through this kind of machinery. What was it about that experience early on that made you think like, I want to follow in my father's footsteps? I like this industry. I want to be part of it. Because, we've had people on the podcast in the past who their father was in oil and gas, and they were like, I want to do the complete opposite. I want nothing to do with this industry, because they've probably seen like the cyclical of it and just how hard their dad was never there type of thing. So what made you decide to be part of the industry?
I think you've hit a couple of points there that are pretty important. Certainly the cyclicality makes it hard to want to join this industry. Seeing how hard my father worked was also kind of a negative. But at the same time, coming into it at a really young age, seeing the immensity of a big drilling rig, smelling the smells, hearing the noise, all that action going on, seeing the crew working back then even together really hard was it was almost kind of intoxicating. And I remember going home from those trips and using my building blocks at the time and my old Meccano set at the time, and starting to build little mini drilling rigs at home.
Wow. I thought that was so funny when you told me, and you're like, go Google it. You'll be able to still find these like, it made me think of like Legos.
Yeah.
But what was really interesting too is when we were talking, you were telling me about the dinner table and how when your dad would come home, y'all would talk about things and issues that he had in the field or with work. And you were always sitting there like trying to find solutions to them. And so you were at a very young age too, you were really like evolved in like, how can I make this better? How can my dad make his business better? And it really challenged you very early on. And your philosophy even today is still fostering kind of that open-minded thought process and those around you as well. Tell me a little bit about what it was like, but more importantly too, with your dad, I remember you also saying that he had such high expectations of people that it was really hard for him to be like, okay, this is my expectation. Like, why can't you meet that expectation without giving really guidance? So tell me kind of how you were able to overcome that, and also as a leader today, what you're doing to ensure that you give that guidance.
Yeah, you've hit a couple really key points there too. I think, first of all, dinner table conversations for families are super important. You really get the values imparted on the kids, and they understand how you think about the world. And in my father's case, we talked about his business all the time at the dinner table. And it wasn't unusual, it wasn't weird or anything. But what I could see was that he used the term, I wish people had more common sense. I wish I could understand what I'm looking for. It's so clean, so clear what I'm looking for. But what wasn't clear, I think, at the time was I think he wasn't maybe the best communicator outside the family. Certainly inside our family, he was a wonderful communicator. But I think outside the family, he probably had a bit of a challenge explaining his expectations to his team so they can understand what he wanted and they could deliver what he was looking for. And I think the term common sense is vastly overused.
And so because of that, when you're with your teams today, I know you were very cognizant on, I want to make sure that they know at Precision Drilling, like what our goal is, like where we're headed and how to get there. Tell us about that.
So I'd say that that's shaped my entire career. And even today, when we think about, we'll publish our 2025 strategic objectives in just a few days' time. And then we'll go through the organization and make sure we explain to everybody what these objectives are, what's important to the company, where they fit in, what's expected of them. So they can understand what the company's trying to accomplish and try to get a bit of a sense for where they fit in and what they can do to influence the company.
Communication is key, and I don't think we say it enough, but it's the foundation really to anything, so that everybody's kind of walking towards the same path. And that's all about communication, especially from the top, right? And kind of going back to your story, you decided to pursue a degree in engineering because obviously you want to go into the oil and gas industry, but you kind of wanted to marry that kind of technical expertise with the business acumen of just seeing your father run his business, etc. And, there was a big kind of devastating Canadian energy policy that forced your family's business to shut down in the 1980s. How did that situation kind of shape you into continuing your career, but also kind of how did that impact you on just a small business that your father was so deeply involved in and you were too, and all of a sudden it's shut down? But luckily, you still had both that technical expertise and then the business acumen. How did that come together?
Yeah, we touched on earlier about the cyclicality of this industry, and that was maybe the worst cycle I've seen, was that 1981-82 cycle when the Canadian Energy Program effectively shut down the Canadian oil and gas industry. And our business, which was building drilling rigs at the time, we went from having 5 new drilling rig projects in our backlog to having those rigs all canceled in about a week's time.
Wow.
So we spent the next few months negotiating with the bank and negotiating with all of our secured and unsecured lenders so that we could close the business down in an orderly manner without declaring Chapter 11 or bankruptcy. We did that, successfully did that. We sold the assets. My dad became the manager of the company that took over the assets in a different product line. And I continued the business. I felt that I had a deep understanding of the industry, understanding of how to communicate with people, and felt I could continue a path in the business. But it was tough. I mean, there weren't many jobs back in Canada in 1982 when I was graduating as an engineer to go into the energy business. I think my graduating class of 76 students, I think 11 of us actually had jobs when I graduated.
Wow.
So these cycles have been tough in this industry, and we've seen a few recently with the pandemic and the global economic meltdown in 2008-9.
Well, I think, if you go to LinkedIn right now, we're seeing tons of people saying they're getting laid off, and it doesn't really even feel like we're in like a lull right now, but it's definitely happening. You've had this throughout your career multiple times, and you've also, as a leader of Precision Drilling, unfortunately there's times where you have to let people go. However, for you, what are some steps that you take to ensure that those that when you're in a circumstance where you do have to let people go, how do we minimize that as an industry? But more importantly, when you yourself had to have be laid off due to whatever circumstances, how did you overcome that? Because there's a lot of people listening right now that potentially just lost their job, and you start to feel like you're in a silo, and how do I get my network? How do I reach out to people? What's some advice you can give them? And then as a leader, what are you doing to kind of change that at Precision Drilling?
That's a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's talk about, if you're in a situation where your company is downsizing and you're being laid off. The first thing is, it's probably not your fault. And people often blame themselves, they blame their boss, they blame the organization. These companies go through cycles, and the way they survive, the way they're able to rehire people in a rebounding environment is by getting through the tough times. So unfortunately, when you have a highly cyclic business, layoffs are part of the industry, and it's a real tough part. And we can talk a lot more about that. But certainly if you're being laid off, probably it's a function of the industry you're in, certainly this industry, and the company trying to make sure it's going to survive through that. I'd say that network of people and relationships matter a lot. So in fact, when I was looking for my first job, when we were closing our family business down, I went back to my network and found a couple of opportunities inside our network that looked good, and I was able to get a job with one of those. And that network, I would say, played into my career back in 1982, again in 1990, again in 2007, and it plays into my career even today. There are people I met back in the early 80s that I'm still coming across today. So those friendships you make and those networks you make, protect those. And the larger, wider network that you have, the more marketable you can be over time.
I love that. And I think we mentioned that last time too, was your network is your net worth in a way. And when things like this happen, those are the people you can reach out to that are going to pass along your resume, that are going to contact people for you, and that are going to vouch for you when somebody calls and asks about you and, you know, your work, etc. So it's, you never know those people that you can meet, how they're going to help you when like a downturn hits or when, you know, things get tough.
And I would add one more piece to that. I'd say there are opportunities popping up all the time. So you have to be in a position where you can see the opportunity and actually grab it. And if you're at home and not using your network and not seeing those opportunities, and those people don't see you, if they see something, they might not even think of you. So keeping that visibility and keeping that openness to and positioning yourself to maximize your exposure to opportunities that you can then decide if you want to take or not take.
I like that. Hidden opportunities every day. You just have to find them.
They are there all the time. Even in the worst downturns, there are opportunities.
Agree.
And, you know, I'll go back to even my career. When I took my very first job, I was coming out of a engineering school as a graduate mechanical engineer. And the job I took was, you might argue, a couple pay grades below a graduate engineer. It was in a welding shop, drawing templates in the shop. But it was a starting point. It was an entry point in the industry, and allowed me to lever that into a very long and I think reasonably successful career.
Definitely successful. Very successful. So I kind of want to understand a little bit the path. So you graduated, you got this welding job. What were kind of those different companies that you joined, and then you got into precision drilling? Can you bring us through a little bit of that like career journey?
Yeah, you know, it's a tortured path, like the industry goes through tortured paths. But I took this job at the time, National Supply, working in the welding shop, helping the welders with their torch cutting machine. I was quickly able to show that I could do more than that. They brought me into the office to be an engineer, and I was working in industrial engineering, which is optimizing manufacturing for the shop. And we were going quite well. And then that was by 6 months into my job, or late 1982. And then the company started going through a bunch of layoffs. We went through 6 rounds of layoffs. And I think I was the last surviving member of the engineering team because I was the newest, lowliest paid engineer, which sometimes it helps to be cheapest. I retained my job, but I watched the guys around me. I watched what they went through in their families, and some had moved from Eastern Canada out west, and some had young families, and they were losing their job, and it was really tough. And one of the questions I was asked earlier that I'll come back to now is, how do you avoid going through layoffs? And one of the ways you avoid going through layoffs is by not overstaffing when the business is looking good. And this industry has a habit of, when it starts growing, we're now hiring staff for the next phase of growth before the phase of growth gets there. And we keep on doing that. So we tend to overstaff in the upturns, and we bring too many people on, and we encourage them, we show them a great future, and then the industry, you know, goes through a cycle, and now we've got too many people because we weren't growing at the level we thought we'd grow to. So I've always worked hard to try not to oversize the organization and try not to hire people kind of betting on the next step up. Anyway, you know, my career took me through that manufacturing role. I kind of grew through levels in Canada in their production business. Got an opportunity to move to London back in about 1989 to run Europe, Africa, Middle East for National Supply, which by then was called National Oil Well. I did that for almost 3 years, and then I had an opportunity to move to change companies, to go to a company that was based in Edmonton called Drico Energy Services, and set up and run their brand new Russian division. So my wife and I moved from the west end of London to the west end of Moscow, and that was a culture shock. But we set up an operation in Moscow for Drico, this Edmonton-based rig building company. We began exporting Canadian-built well service rigs and they're modified for the Siberian market. And we're quite successful doing that.
It was in Russia where I feel like you've learned a lot about leadership and trust, because that's when I remember when we spoke, you were talking about how when you showed up there, it was like culture shock, but more importantly, they immediately trust you. Like you're like, there was just an inherentness of like trust without even having to ask for it. Tell us about how, like what you learned in Russia and how that really changed the way that you look at business.
So when I moved to Moscow, we had to set up shop there. We're dealing in a country that only spoke Russian. There was simply no English in business. Most other countries, there's some level of English. In Russia, there was none. It was all Russian. And I didn't speak a word of Russian. We had to hire a highly skilled translator who, by the way, back in those days, was supplied by the KGB. So the Foreign Service Department under the KGB would supply Western companies with translators. So we had a wonderful woman who came on staff as our translator. And I remember asking her, so what do you tell your KGB agent every Friday? I tell them how tough this business is, is what she'd tell them. Anyway, I think she still works at the company. She's a wonderful lady. And She was my translator, and she had to translate all of our commercial and all of our technical issues. So I'd speak in English, and she'd translate to Russian. She'd have to feed back to me the response from the client. And I had to immediately trust her implicitly, that she's getting the translation right, and that she understands the important drivers for us, that what I was hearing back was not just what they were saying, but what they were feeling. Because you're in the same language, you can get that body language. And Russian body language can be exaggerated. And it can be quite emotional. It'd be hard to sort through that emotion if you don't understand the culture that well. So, I'd say that's where I learned that I had to give my trust to, and her name was Olga, to act as my voice in Russian. And I kind of learned, I shifted my view of trust away from trust as something that you learn to something that you give. And I think that's where it started happening, was giving her my trust to be my negotiator. And obviously, I had a huge amount of respect for her. And I had that very early on. And I think I learned those two notions are things that if we give them out, we get them back very quickly. It becomes very powerful in business. It's when you're operating with not a lot of trust or respect that you're quite limited in how far you can go. And certainly, if people don't feel like they're trusted, they don't want to work very hard for you. If they feel they have your trust, they work much harder for you, much harder with you. So those two notions of both trust and respect really very quickly developed for me in that Russian environment where I didn't have the language skills and had to rely on everything going through Olga. And eventually we hired more people on the same issue. They were, I had to trust that they understood my values. I had to really communicate my values well to them. And things grew really quickly for us. We had a lot of success in Russia back in 1992, 93, 94, 95.
How long were you in Russia for?
So I lived there for a year with my wife, and then our first son was being born, so my wife came back to Canada, and I commuted back and forth for another year, and then transitioned the job into another executive estate in Russia, and I ran operations for Drico back in Canada until National Oil Well bought us in
full circle
1996. So I'm back to my first job at National Oil Well as the division vice president for the Drico products under National Oil Well by the mid 1990s.
That's funny. We've heard a lot of those. Like you leave a company, it's a small oil-filled world, and then they get bought out. You're back to the same badge you had on your hard hat or on your coveralls, and so it's funny. You can never escape certain companies.
But when I left National Oil Well back in, at the time would have been late 1992, it had a really dysfunctional leadership organization. By 1996, they completely fixed that. A private equity organization that bought the company, installed new management, and the company had done an IPO. It was a very good company by 1996. When they acquired our company, it was a much better place to come into. It was interesting. I think one of my first comments when I joined this new organization was, I'll have to see how you guys do. That was a pretty arrogant comment for a, 30, I think I was 34, 35 at the time, coming back into a company I left just a few years earlier. And I think I've learned to just tone down my inner voice a little bit.
So a question I had for you on leadership. So to your point, you've worked in Canada, you manage Europe, North Africa, and Russia business. I've heard a lot of people who've worked in Russia, that is a tough place to work. Not just the language barriers, but it's just a very different culture. But it's also some of like the best adventures and great people from what I've heard. And it's a place I would love to visit one day. Can you tell us a little bit just on the leadership skills that you've developed? Obviously, you mentioned you were pretty young, like mid-30s. You're running all these companies. How did you handle coming from, Edmonton, Alberta, pretty, there's not that many I would say immigrants, let's say. I mean, there are, but nothing like maybe Toronto, Montreal, where it's like a melting pot. And then all of a sudden going to North Africa, Europe, Russia, and kind of having to deal with very different people that maybe you weren't like used to. How did you develop that skill set? And then even between Europe and Russia, very different cultures. How do you adapt when you move to different countries and then still be able to run a successful team?
Yeah, I think you've hit a couple of, again, big picture questions there. There's two things I think that I thought about a lot. I very quickly realized that family values in most cultures are really strong, especially Eastern cultures, much stronger than we give them credit for, I think. And, I think we think that our, Judeo-Christian families that we grew up in North America are really tight families. I'll tell you, the families in Russia are extremely close. The parents protect their kids and wanted their kids to have a better life than they did. Really close-knit families. The families in Central Asia, really, really close. It's, if you look at the Indian subcontinent, extremely close, tight-knit
They
families.
usually live with their parents, or like the grandparents are home. They raise their kids. It's very tight.
Yeah, very tight, right? And grandparents live in the same house. In North America, we have these situations where we have the nuclear family. Our grandparents, we put them off in a home somewhere.
Yeah,
Probably we'll all be going soon. But in Eastern Europe and in Central Asia, that's not the case.
Yeah.
And even I've done a lot of business throughout the entire Arabian Gulf, all sides, and family values are still quite strong. And I understand that some cultures have little different notions of what a family consists of. Yet family values remain strong, and people protect their families at kind of all costs. So I think part of understanding that is really a great level ground to start building relationships around my family, their family. That was helpful in building relationships, and this whole element of giving trust out early. So in the Arab world, trust is a really big deal, and business deals are really important. People don't break deals in the Middle East. They shake hands on a transaction. It's a deal. And they will honor that contract. They don't intend to break it. It's actually in the West where people break contracts quite a lot more often. And they don't have any qualms about renegotiating contracts. I've had requests for price concessions in some Middle Eastern countries, but I've never had a contract broken or a contract where the counterparty fails to perform as expected. So, there's examples out there about this everywhere. I get that. But I've been fortunate where my contracts have been held. So I just find that trusting the other party works quite well, and then negotiating good deals for yourself and for them. And, the old win-win is overused. But if you can find a win for your side and find a win for the other side, you generally have better outcomes.
Yeah. Talking about family too, with being the CEO of the company and working within the company, how did you help develop the culture? When you talk about actually having, like, people say all the time, oh, well, where I work is like a family, but is it really? Like, how do you make sure that everybody that you hire and the way that even the managers, treat their employees, it feels like a family? Because that's the biggest thing. People leave because of a bad manager, not usually because of the overall arching of the culture, because inherently we want a great culture. Every leader does. But how do you really make that culture happen?
Yeah, so the word family is quite broad, and family values are quite broad, and different families have different values. When I joined Precision back in 2007, they had a family-based culture already. They had very clear, well-defined, well-communicated values for the organization. So I came into a company that already had the notion of, hardwired values, and family was woven into that. The definition of family that was the Precision definition at the time. There's a second component, though. On the drilling rig, the business was such that you have 5 or 6 crew on the rig. The rig crew works very closely together. The most successful rigs, that crew stays together for a long time, and it becomes like a bit of a family of brothers working together. So I think that the field model of Precision fit well with what the corporate entity was trying to promote. I came in, I really liked that value and that culture for the family, so we just kind of kept building on it. And I'd say that what we had in place in 2007 is in place in 2025 and more. We've developed programs where we actually encourage hiring family members. We've developed programs where, so for example, we have a student intern program. Every summer we take on between 55 and 75 interns. We guarantee every family member that if they have a child in college, they're guaranteed an internship.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah, and if they...
That's very cool.
And so any employee that has a child in university is guaranteed an internship at least one summer, maybe 2, maybe 3. We'll hire a few of those interns into permanent positions. And that also helps reinforce that we take care of each other, take care of the family. It is tough on families when you go through divorces. It's tough on families when you go through industry downturns and now you're laying off people that for the last few years you've been trying to treat like family members and trying to build values around. And that certainly is something you have to manage and work to mitigate, which is where communication and trust really come into play. But also dealing really fairly with anybody who is going to be leaving the company and trying to make sure they're treated as fairly as you can. And fair is a dangerous word too, because what's fair to me isn't always fair to you. And there's always kind of 2 sides of that river. So we just try to treat our people as best as we can, whether they're staying or leaving the company.
That's a good way to do business,
Yeah.
just in general, right? Question for you. Now that you're CEO of Precision Drilling, would you say that as your journey was going through its ups and downs and you're learning more and more, did you want to become a CEO? Would you say younger you thought of being a CEO? Did you ever imagine it? Did you speak it into existence? I mean, how did you prepare for that over the years? Or was it more like, hey, here's this letter, you're going to be CEO, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, wow, I haven't thought about this.
Yeah, I think you don't get to any senior role without having an objective and a vision. So I think you don't
visualize it.
You don't fall into a chief executive role. You plan, you execute your career, you do all the right things along the way, and when those opportunities come by, you're ready to grab it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's an opportunity you choose to grab, and so I think that's the first thing. But as far as the aspiration for CEO, I grew up in an entrepreneurial family. My dad ran a business. I expected to run his business. When that didn't pan out, the business I joined at the time, which was National Supply, I certainly had my eyes set on someday running that business.
Yeah.
And one piece of my history I missed out. I worked for a really short time at Drico, the company I joined in Russia, before I joined National Supply. And the guy I worked for was actually the founder of Precision Drilling.
Oh, okay.
So the neat part is that network I created way back when I was just finishing off university, working part-time at Drico, I kept in place. And when the founder of Precision announced his retirement, who I knew and kept a relationship with over those years, I put my name in the hat. I wanted to grab that opportunity, which I worked hard, went through a series of interviews with the board, and grabbed the opportunity.
Wow.
But I would say, growing up in my father's family, working in a family business, I always viewed myself as wanting to lead the business. And whether that business was National Oil Well, National Oil Varco, or eventually Precision Drilling, that was always in my vision for myself. But I can turn the question back on you two.
Yeah.
Are either of you parents?
Both of us.
Both of your parents.
Yeah.
Do you have a vision that your children will go to university?
No, I don't want my daughter to go to university.
You don't want her, but you have a vision for her.
Yes, but it's not school.
But it's a vision. But it's a vision, right?
Yeah.
And how old is she?
She's 3 years old.
So you really don't know her that well,
I guess.
right? She's a
think we
3-year-old.
do.
She's
Yeah.
not an adult yet.
Yeah.
You don't know what she's going to grow into, what she's going to become. But you have a vision for her. Everything you're doing is directing her towards that vision.
It's true.
It'll take you 20 years to reach that objective. Maybe 15 years,
Yeah.
not 3 or 4 years. But you have to have a long-term vision for how you're going to raise your children and whether it's university or not university or arts or whatever it's going to be. Most of what you do as a parent is focused on delivering that vision.
It's true.
So it's not much different for a career.
I really like that analogy because, it just made me think, like, I have 2 daughters and I think about it all the time. And it's everything, every decision that you make, like even which school, which preschool.
You're putting them on that path.
Yeah, which person are you going to have? Like right now I have a nanny that stays home with my 6-month-old. It's like even deciding on, do I want a bilingual nanny? Can I find a bilingual? Like all these things that you're like, I think they'll be successful in this. But to your point, what I really like what you said is you said you don't know them at all.
You don't know them at all.
You don't know them, but you
have a vision for their future.
You have a vision for their future, and they can either go that route, or they can also, when they have a voice, they can also voice.
And your
which
vision may get
direction.
altered.
Yeah.
Maybe not.
Yeah. But I think that's very, like, I was like, yeah, that's so true.
Yeah. From the time I can recall, my mother would tell me I'm going to university. And I just grew up knowing there was no choice.
Yeah.
And it wasn't even, I didn't feel burdened by it. I just knew I was going to university. And of course, she wanted me to be a doctor, not to be in the oil and gas business. There's no question. I had a lot of pull that direction.
Yeah.
But I had real interest in the business from that 5-year-old visit on. My dad had a clear, bigger picture.
Yeah.
And he went out that one. But there's no question. My parents, implanted this vision of higher education I was going to have to get, and I just lived with it, knowing it.
Yeah.
And they didn't know what I turned into. And so, as a young parent yourself now, you're dealing with the same thing. A 6-month-old that
And a 4-year-old.
and a 4-year-old
Yeah.
who again, what's that 4-year-old going to turn into, right? You don't know.
Yeah.
But you're still pathing everything, every decision you make, every step you take is focused on that long-term vision.
And for your children, what was your vision for them, and where are they today?
Yeah, so I did something different at the dinner table. I made both my children ask questions about what I was doing. I didn't talk about work. In fact, I avoided it. My kids would say, "Dad, what do you do?" I go to work. What do you do at work? I sit at a desk and talk to people. They'd say, "What do you talk about?" So I would make them inquire.
Be interested
A-
in
and
you and your work.
and rather than sit there and have me tell them the way the world worked, I'll let them try to figure it out by asking me questions about what I did. And I think I don't know what they'd say today. My son probably will listen to this podcast. My daughter maybe, and they might say, "Yeah, he's so full of it." But I can recall over the years making them ask questions about what I did
Mm-hmm.
and helping them develop their critical thinking so they could decide if they wanted to go this way or this way. Although university was going to be mandatory
Yes.
in our kids' case.
Did
Yeah.
they go into the industry?
My
or-
son is in the industry, and my daughter became an accountant. And that was kind of a cool story because she had an internship in the industry, and she was focused on a finance major. But the job she took as this intern was working for a public accountant in the industry. And she said, his job looks pretty good. So she changed her major,
Oh, wow.
to become an accountant. And she's a very successful public accountant and loves her job.
I love that. I mean,
And the
sometimes
intern-
you don't know what you want to do until you see
Yeah.
somebody else doing it. And you're like,
Right.
wait, that is what I want to do.
Yeah.
And so that's really great that she had that epiphany, basically. And,
Yeah, and my son's kind of watched this industry from day one. He's interned
Mhm.
in the industry several times and likes the industry. He's got a great job and loves his job right now.
So talking about the younger generation, to close, we really want to kind of hit on some stuff that we spoke about, and I thought it was very true, especially in a business like yours where, every year in oil and gas, we would love to say that the rig count goes up and it's, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, right? That's not the case. If anything, it goes down. And so when you're in a business that's relying on that, it's hard for growth and it's hard for the generation, like the new generation coming in, you're, the first fresh outs, like, where am I going to be? Where's my next path? And then, we get another downturn and then rigs get cut. So I know when we spoke, this was something that was on your mind on, like, this is a limiter that you wish that you could overcome. What are you doing today within the organization to make sure that the ones that you can have a path to something else? That way they
Yeah.
don't have to leave to find that role.
Yeah, in fact, it's a real challenge right now because the industry's been flat in the U.S. for the last couple of years, flat, maybe down just a little bit. It's really hard to develop really good young talent when the business just isn't growing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been a big challenge for myself and for our team. So we've been working hard to make sure that our young talent gets lots of variety, gets moved around, gets different roles. And even back in my early career, I grew up through the 1980s when there was simply no growth.
Mm-hmm.
And, I wasn't afraid to take on any job at the time. I remember that first job working in the welding shop, but other roles I took where I think there's a couple of takeaways for me and it still works today. Number one is be really hardworking. Like, work ethic never is a competitive advantage. And it's even more so today than it was 10 or 15 years ago. Work ethic's competitive advantage, keeping an open mind, being the first one to put your hand up and say, I'll do the less desirable work, gets you more experience. And the more experience you can get and the wider network of people you work for and that network that you build as being, if you're viewed that is somebody that will do whatever it takes to, get the job done, you'll take on the less attractive work and you're hardworking. Those are skill sets that if you combine them together, makes you almost a competitive advantage over almost everybody else. And then it gets really hard to lay that person off because they will be the go-to person.
Mm-hmm. And one last thing I want to mention, and I don't know if you saw it, but I did a LinkedIn post and I was like, well, I spoke with the CEO today and he talked about patience. And you mentioned that patience can be a factor of differentiating yourself from others. And I really felt like that was very true because there's a lot of times where you just jump. And like, especially even in my career case, there's multiple times where I've left not being patient because I got this other opportunity. I'm just going to go. And you mentioned that sometimes being patient and sitting still can can really divide you from your peers in a more positive way.
Yeah, I think that's actually a huge point. Patience right now is really a rare commodity.
Mm-hmm.
And there are so many opportunities floating in so many different directions that it's easy to, grab the next opportunity. What I'll say is the grass is never actually greener.
Mm-hmm.
We make the grass as green as we can make it. So if you work hard and work in your lawn and, put the bug killer on and put the fertilizer on, grass grows nice and green, but it takes a lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're not working hard at your career, the grass is always going to look greener somewhere else. That's the first thing. And if you position yourself well, you'll see lots of opportunities and be patient and look for the opportunities that clearly are the best.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't see many opportunities right now, be patient. There'll be more coming along.
Mm-hmm.
This industry isn't going away. It's going to be around for a long time. It's really hard to replace that high density of energy you get inside diesel and gasoline and natural gas. So we've got a lot of work. We will find a solution at some point, but probably not during my career, not during your careers, probably not during my son's career. So there's going to be a long horizon here for great careers. So patience can be a real advantage. And I just don't see much of it today.
Yeah. No, Kevin, I think that your whole story and also just the advice that you give, and like even when we spoke, I was just so inspired by you and how you overcame so much and still getting to where you're at today. And also everywhere you traveled and all the things you learned in different cultures, I think was really great to share with our listeners. And we're very happy to be able to do it here at Digital Wildcatter Studio. So I'm really glad that you're able to come and meet us.
Thank you so much. What a wonderful story. This is our first back to in-person podcast, so you're going to see a lot more of this. But thank you for being our first one in 2025. Yes. And it's just so amazing that you said yes to coming on the podcast. And it's just, people learn just so much from your story and from the fact that you are the CEO and you can still come and have a conversation with us on this table. That means a lot to us, and I know to our listeners too. So thank you so much.
Well, great. Thanks for having me today. It was a lot of fun, and really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. And if you caught the whole episode, we are here. We're at Digital Wildcatter Studio. You should come follow Digital Wildcatters. I'm pretty sure all of their socials are Digital Wildcatters. And then for Flipping the Barrel, same thing. We'd love to hear from you. You can email us at flippingthebarrel@gmail.com. You can find us at everything Flipping the Barrel, flippingthebarrel.com, Flipping the Barrel at Instagram, LinkedIn. Love to hear from you. And thank you again, Kevin, for coming in today.
Thanks.
See you next time.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.